here. Since this is the last session before lunch, I'm sure everyone's interested in starting and stopping on time. So with that, I'm Mike McGregor with Baker Farmer Working Engineering. I'll be moderating the session where we have in person and we also have virtual options. So I'll also be kind of looking at the chat and trying to convey any questions that come from the virtual side to the presenters so that they can address them. This session is the Eel River Bridge, a historically select bridge, gets relocated. The presenters this morning, I'll just kind of provide their names and then they can give whatever background they want, but certainly bios are on the app if you want to read more about them. But the presenters today are Kyle Muellner, Sean Porter, and Dan Prevost. And I think Sean's going to start off and we'll kick this off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. So this is the final product right here. So this was a truss bridge that was in disrepair and got put in a park-like setting here. You can kind of see the video here. This is some drone photography kind of showing you. So the location of where these bridges are, there were two 198-foot span trusses that were on State Road 46 between Terre, Indiana and Bloomington, Indiana. And it's kind of a major corridor. It gets a lot of trucks, over 10% trucks in this area. And, with these trusses, it was just time to find a new home. So you got to see the new home for them. So this is the agenda. I'm just going to go through briefly kind of a project overview of the project. Dan's going to have the really boring project, historic section 106 discussion. And then Kyle has the fun part, talking about the bridge construction and what happened as the bridge was being constructed. So this is just kind of a slide showing Indiana has a program agreement with SHPO and Federal Highway and NDOT to try to preserve as many historic bridges as possible. So this was in 2009, they did a survey and they went ahead and came up with the number of select bridges that it had in the state. It was over 400. And in 2021, still over 400 bridges. So there's some reduction. Obviously, you can't keep every bridge, but they're trying to do their best to go ahead and preserve these bridges because there's so many of these being lost and just find a location for them to be used. So that's what brings us to this bridge. Looks like you're going to be able to see any of our headings, but that's all right. Let me see the picture. So this is where the Eel River Bridge is. Where it was at one point, where basically the river had kind of migrated over to the west side. When it was originally built in 1934, the water was totally in the eastern side. So it just migrated over time. This will be important. So Kyle's going to kind of go over that a little bit more later. So this is the city I was talking about. So the bridge is just a little bit west of town there, kind of a gateway into Bowling Green. And Bowling Green is a historic area. This is one of the billboards that was very close to the bridge as you're coming into the city. So 1800s is when Bowling Green was established. So a lot of history. There used to be a covered bridge there, and then this bridge replaced that covered bridge. But this bridge had quite the history. A lot of repairs that were needed. It was probably not maintained the best for a truss bridge. You need to paint it, maintain those members, make sure you don't have rusting. As you'll see in a photo in a second, there was a lot of rust when we got involved in this project. So this bridge was actually a standard drawing. It was not even really designed for the site. It was a 198-foot long truss, 20-foot width. And Indiana used the standard drawing and just put it in different locations. Like over the Wabash, they had 6 spans of this bridge. There's others where they had one span. They used this bridge, but here at this location, it was 2 spans because of the floodway. The trucks, obviously, back in 1934, we designed for built trucks, nothing like today's trucks. So this bridge was not designed for the trucks that it was carrying in today. this kind of shows you, those different limits there. Inspection, since it is a fracture critical bridge, it is inspected every year, and that's one of the reasons they had some of these emergency contracts, is because of the inspections that happen every year. So here's a photo right there of that west bank, kind of seeing those banks. There's a lot of erosion going on there over the years. So one of the things, if we kept the bridge where it currently was, we were going to have to do something to reinforce those banks and scour protection and some different things to be able to keep it where it currently was. This is the scary photo. So you see this, bridges are not supposed to have 100% section loss. You can see daylight through these, a lot of rusting. This is a gusset, interior gusset place. That's a main load carrying area. So it was a little scary when we did our first inspection on this bridge, and it was, we were doing it, looking at it to see, for rehab, and there are a lot of areas of need. So as I stated, not a lot of love was given to this bridge over the years. It was a little scary, actually. I was on it, inspecting it when a logging truck went over, and I'm like, all right, let me off this thing. I've seen enough. We actually shut it down, not because of these photos, but there was a splice point where it had rivets, and it had never been cleaned off at that area. So we cleaned it off, brushed it off. We looked at it. The rivets were completely gone, and it was very scary at that splice location. So we actually shut down the bridge and did emergency repair until we could come in with this final project. Flooding. This is an area, the floodplain gets a lot of water, that's all the way up there to the bottom chord. So hydraulics is playing a big component in this bridge. Need for the project. I think with the pictures you just saw, the needs of the project, and also the hydraulics. So other desired outcomes, they wanted to go ahead and improve some sight distance, some other things by the bridge that were bad where a road connected in. So locally, there are some people that got the bridge listed as it was on the National Register of Historic Places. So there are some people there, historians, that were really wanted to see this bridge stay in its current locations. But, in the early stages, NDOT advertised this, trying to find out if anyone need a 198-foot bridge, any trail projects, anything out there where we could relocate this and use this bridge. The people there came up with a website. They really wanted the bridge to stay in its current location, not be relocated. There's a lot of kayak trips and canoe trips that go underneath this. And this is, we didn't make this website. This is the local people there. I don't know why they put Homer Simpson there, but anyway, this is something they came up with. They thought weddings could happen on the bridge. It would be a great place where you could pull off your canoe, go up there, have a picnic table on there and use it that way. So we said, okay, if there is some interest, let's go ahead and talk to the county. So we talked to the Clay County commissioners, and we asked them, do you want this bridge? Would you want to do a trail there? What would you like to do? And they're like, we don't want this bridge. We don't want to have to maintain this bridge. We don't want to have to inspect this bridge every year. We'd like it to go somewhere where people will actually use it. So that's where we came in, and we talked to DNR, and we advertised it, and Salt Creek Trail came in as a perfect fit because of it's a very big tourist area for Nashville, and to be able, the Salt Creek Trail is going to connect Nashville to the Brown County State Park, and it's a lot of, in the fall when the leaves change, they get a lot of visitors there, and they're thinking that this bridge would get a minimum of 10,000 people per year that would use this bridge. They would see it. We'd have some historic markers there to kind of talk about the history of the bridge. So it's a perfect opportunity to preserve this bridge and be used. Then comes Dan Prevost and this historic 106 process. So we kind of hit a brick wall. So I'll turn it over to him.
Thanks, Sean. So quick poll. Other than one, any Section 106 professionals in the room? Anybody lived and experienced the Section 106 process? And on a historic bridge, perhaps? Did it go well?
It went long.
Okay. You might see a theme here. Yeah, I want to give a little context to that brick wall for just a minute here. For those who aren't familiar with the 106 process, essentially it's a process that came out of the National Historic Preservation Act. It basically says anytime federal action or federal money is involved, you've got to take into account the effect on properties that are on or eligible for listing in the National Register. And that Section 106 consultation process really looks like the rest of the environmental process that you're probably accustomed to under NEPA. Essentially, you go out and you identify resources, you assess the project's impacts to those resources, and then you look for ways to avoid, minimize, or mitigate the impacts to those resources. One of the differences with 106 is there's also a process to bring into the process what are called consulting parties. And those are folks who have a particular interest in historic resources, either through their profession or through local organizations, that sort of thing. So in Indiana, FHWA and INDOT and the SHPO in Indiana developed a programmatic agreement process in 2006 to address historic bridges in particular. And through that process, they actually surveyed every single bridge in the state and identified those that they considered to be eligible for listing in the National Register, those that they didn't. And among those that were eligible, they put them into two groups, and Sean alluded to those. They called them select and non-select. And the select bridges were really those bridges that were, truly warranting preservation. They were either unique or special in some way, or more probable, we'll say, for preservation. In the case of the State Route 46 bridge, as you might expect based on the presentation, it was found to be select under that process. As Sean noted, it's a standard plan, but it was still an excellent example of that. And it was actually getting to be one of the few remaining examples of it left in the state. Now, when they did the survey, they actually made a special note on this one where they said it was select, but for non-vehicular use. And so they kind of recognized that because of the deteriorated condition of the bridge, and also because it was a truss, which has more relocation potential than a lot of other bridge types, it might have a better use as a non-vehicular bridge. So about that consulting party meeting, this was December 2014, just keep that date in mind. Process really kind of came to a halt. As Sean alluded, we thought we had this perfect plan. We'd identified the Salt Creek Trail, but it's going to be this great resource for Indians and tourists. And well, it turns out that there's some local interest in keeping the bridge right there, as Sean talked about a little bit. And so we went to this consulting party meeting, and what we heard basically was that, A, that there was a lot of interest in keeping it there, and B, that INDOT and the project team had not done enough to try to solicit that feedback and that input from those locals. Also, the SHPO was concerned that once we relocated the bridge, it would actually drop off the National Register. So that was kind of another complicating factor. Also complicating things in Indiana is the fact that there's a state law that kind of overlays on top of Section 106. So in addition to getting approval by SHPO, you've also had to get approval from what's called the Historic Preservation Review Board. And just to make things more fun, they only meet 4 times a year. So in terms of expedience of process, it creates a little bit of a speed bump there. So going to fly through kind of the process over a period of time, and keep in mind that December 2014 date where we had that consulting party meeting. So as a result of that meeting, we actually ended up having a public meeting in January 2015, and 150 people came to hear about the project and express, we'll say, admittedly, mostly interest in keeping it, but there was, there's some folks on both sides of that. Now, also keep in mind that you saw the map of Bowling Green. The total population of Bowling Green is about 600 people. So about a quarter of the town showed up for our meeting here. We talked a lot about, essentially what ended up happening was INDOT ended up kind of reopening the opportunity for groups to come forward to express interest in keeping this bridge and set a time limit on that of 6 months. Now, again, keep that date in mind. So in February 2015, we actually went back to the Clay County commissioners and said, answer some questions. And then in June of 2015, we put out a public notice to set forth those parameters if anybody was interested in taking the bridge, kind of conditions that they would have to live with. Had another public meeting in August of 2015. This time only got about 70 folks, so an eighth of the town, I guess. Met with the local Parks Association to see if they had any interest in pursuing keeping the bridge. We had some more coordination with the keeper of the National Register, which is a little, actually the only project in my career that we've actually had to go to the keeper about. In the August 2015 through October 2015, we had more coordination with Clay County about their interest or willingness. In December of 2015, so this is 1 year after that consulting party meeting, the county commissioners voted unanimously to decline ownership of the bridge. But great. We go to submit to the that Historic Preservation Review Board, and we go meet with them in January 2016, and all our friends from the community showed up and made emotional pleas about keeping the bridge and so forth, and the review board voted no. They didn't approve our plan. So, all right, February through May of 2016, we started looking at possibilities to bypass the bridge. Maybe we can keep it there. Maybe everybody could be made happy on this thing. Another consulting parties meeting that summer. Finally, that summer, also the Clay County commissioners came back and said, no, we're really not interested, to be, just to be clear. So we said, all right, so back to the review board. Now at that review board meeting, I guess, having had time to reflect and, having gotten their feedback the first time around, NDOT really made a point of talking about, what it is that, what their history and their experience is with historic bridges and bypassing them. And when they talked about, they've got this long history. You see some pictures of these bridges that essentially end up abandoned almost in like a field next to a new highway. And there's very little access, there's very little use, often very little maintenance, just because of the capacity of the local jurisdictions to take that on. And as a result, they really end up kind of sitting and languishing and deteriorating until it's finally time to remove them. On the other hand, NDOT has some experience with relocating historic bridges to places where they've been very successful, and those were places where they could be incorporated into an existing trail network that had more than just a very limited use. Sean talked about the fact that this location by Brown County State Park in the city of Nashville, it's a very high usage area. It's a very popular state park. There was a local plan. There's a lot of parts of the trail had already been built. And so ultimately, you had to ask yourself kind of, what's the best use of taxpayer money, in terms of where this bridge should, go. So finally, and also at that second review board meeting, the folks from Brown County and DNR, who were going to be the ones taking ownership of the bridges, came forward and actually gave very, strong presentations about their commitment to keeping that bridge and maintaining it and the good use that it would go to. So finally, that July 2016, remember that day again, that review board voted to approve unanimously the relocation of the bridge. So that still left SHPO to get approval from. And so finally in November of 2016, SHPO agreed with the plan to move the bridge to the Salt Creek Trail and let us move on to the design process finally. So that was essentially almost 24 months after we started, after we hit that brick wall, we were moving forward with a plan that everybody who had to approve. Now I did want to just touch real quick on some things that this process really highlighted in terms of what kind of best practices for when dealing with these kind of projects. First of all, this bridge was on the National Register. That meant that somebody cared enough about it to go through that process and get it listed. If you find yourself in that same situation, find out who that person is, who that group is, and get them involved in the process, because they're the ones that are, if you ignore them, they're the ones that are going to come back and likely object. Hopefully not 2 years worth, but make sure you plan a little time, extra time for that consultation process to play out. Also, one of the things unique about this bridge, it said that those standard plan bridges were, over time diminishing in population in the state. And that actually changed some of the feelings about and the necessity to keep bridges. And so it's important to, periodically go back out and check, essentially to see what the population of certain bridge types are. And, maybe reassess which ones are those that, maybe a bridge that had kind of been off the list now needs to be kind of on the saved list, if you will. The importance of that alternatives analysis, just demonstrating essentially that you thought of every option. You've looked at all the options to keep or preserve this bridge, and that you're really headed towards the best solution for both the project as well as that historic resource. And finally, when you do go out, when you're trying to find a location, not only be, widespread in terms of that outreach, but be transparent. We found out a little bit after the fact that, a lot of folks didn't know that we'd gone out and done this blanket survey or blanket, request for options, and they felt left out of that process. So, make sure that that's a big, an open and transparent process. With that, Kyle finally could pick up and start designing these things.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to walk through a bunch of photos, as Sean mentioned, discussing kind of where we started and finished. Usually these big, steel trusses from the late 20s and 30s, especially, are thought of more as workhorses, not kind of the old aesthetic iron horses. But you'll see it kind of transformed. I've always been a truss guy, and I thought it ended up turning out nicely. So where we started out, looking at this, was inspecting it. This is Katie here. Looks like she's in a precarious position here, but she's tied off. She's got a climbing helmet on there. It's a little nicer than a regular hard hat. It doesn't fall off. But really, she's only a couple feet off the ground in this photo. It's a good idea to have a safety meeting. Kind of give you a few tips to learn something along the way here. But safety meeting before you go out and inspect a bridge. Talk about the kind of things you might encounter, like this red lead paint. Make sure they're washing their hands after they do this kind of thing. Make sure they're tied off to at least one point at all times when climbing. If you haven't climbed on trusses before, this is about the best way we've seen to do it, which is using a rigging company, or at least the simplest way. They come out and put up these cables, and the two guys on the side will run you up and down the truss. To poke your snooper truck out of each one of those truss bays. So it's pretty handy. And then your inspectors can focus on that arm's length inspection. So getting up close and personal with this thing, like Sean said, we had a lot of heavy rust, especially at lower joints like this, the floor beam, lower chord, and vertical. So these floor beams, it was more economical to replace the whole floor beams. And even the lower cores, we replaced them all, replaced all the lower gusset plates. We're just, a lot of times we find them in condition that we can save them and repair them, but these were effectively too far gone, to put it simply. We were able to cut off, lower portions of a lot of the verticals, fix those, and weld new sections back on. This is another, it's kind of tough to see, but your lower gusset plate with air showing through there, a little new green patch behind it. But when we got out to this point, a lot of the patch steel was welded onto old deteriorating gusset plates, and even those were kind of precarious at best. So there were a lot of concerns as we went through this, and we didn't want to have a situation like the I-35W disaster in Minneapolis. This is the gusset plate that failed on that one. Gusset plate's been a lot more serious issue for us inspecting and designing engineers in the past, 15 years now. But reflecting on that, like Sean said, we closed the bridge temporarily between us and INDOT. We wanted to come up with a rapid solution to get this heavily traveled. It's a commercial corridor between Terre Haute and Bloomington, Indiana. Get this back open to traffic and have these trucking companies stop calling the state. So we designed this basically some transfer blocks here, you can see, and Dewey dag bars that are the same strength as the lower cores, 2 top and 2 bottom, 100 KSI. And then at the end, this pin got a saddle block behind here, some nuts that connect those Dewey dag bars and transfer the load. And those were considered 5-year fixes. And we got the thing designed and fixed in about that amount of time to finally shut it down. But in the meantime, we had to look at alternatives. This alternative is a rendering, shows the new bridge over here to the south side on the right, old bridge over here. If we were to turn that into a walking facility or some other type of trail, would be here. Yes, people could use it, but we had some hydraulic issues. The upper photo here, or the upper bridge in the photo here in orange, it's the old trusses. And then our new planned hydraulically efficient three-span bridge was down here. However, this fill and abutment that was here would be blocking all the flow to this one span. So we were going to have problems if we left the bridge in place, which we'd already been designing. We're going to have to basically redesign this newer, simpler bridge to accommodate more of that flow. Also, the river was threatening the western abutment at this time, so there's going to be a lot of armament, and I'll kind of rehash that in a minute. But there was some concern at the state of if this was going to be used for a trail locally, a few hundred people in that town, handful of which may use it. There was just cornfields on the other side, and there were no trails in the area, very rural, and so they considered this an actual bridge elsewhere in Indiana where there's some somebody was noted to have fallen, and some other issues that happened on that one. Off the bridge, and they didn't want something like this to happen, so they were even considering fencing off the whole bridge and not allowing foot traffic onto it, just for as long as the state was going to own the thing, because the county didn't want it. They didn't want it to be a liability. I also mentioned the flow and the abutment, as Sean did. This is the original plans. The eastern span is to the right here, showing where the old channel was. And I got some old grainy photos here. I'm going to flash through quickly. That was 1932. Here's 1948. These red lines represent the piers. So right now, in 16 years, then now the stream has moved over to the middle pier. 1956, a little bit more toward the west. 72, all the way in the west span. 2005, similar, in 2018. Now, like I said, it's threatening the west abutment, and still there's meander coming, but there's still more erosion that's going to happen there. So something to be aware of, and that was going to be a potentially maintenance problem. So moving on to the Salt Creek Trail, which was finally found to be the preferred location. This is the historic town of Nashville, very busy in the fall when the colors are changing. Brown County State Park down here to the right. Which is the most heavily traveled, heavily visited Indiana State Park, beautiful area, kind of like Kentucky actually, hilly. And the two locations of these trusses, which at 200 feet weren't expected to be needed for this stream, which isn't that big, but the hydraulics of this location, they've been trying for years, and they didn't have enough grant money to build this size of a bridge because the hydraulics were so sensitive there that they couldn't get it permitted. Went through design, not going to get too far into that, but I wanted to move into construction. There's a whole other seminar we can have on design and rehab techniques, but wanted to move into construction here. Looking at two cranes, it's about as big a truss as you can move with just cranes and walking them. If you think about it, these trusses are about 35 feet tall, and so these cranes are massive. As they sit here, see in a minute the people walking around. So I'm going to set it in motion. It's a little time lapse of them moving this first span. Usually you got say two of these full size cranes. Each one of them costs 125 grand, maybe 150 grand a day to bring out there. So they want to get them in, get them out, and not have to use them too often. But usually you'll see one of these big cranes and a small one on the other end, maybe a dolly to roll it off with. But this one, they use two of them. One was down in the valley and on a causeway. Here they come rolling it, and it took maybe half hour or something like that. Took all day to set the thing up, but it take a whole lot of time to move it over. And successfully set it down, disassembled it, took it off to a laydown yard to have it further disassembled and rehabbed. So they called us out. We came out and took a look at things with them. These are the end joints with the pins. We actually saw a lot of pretty good looking metal there. We're happy to see that, but there are some areas where, you know, things just fell apart when they set them down, of course. And when you take trusses apart, you start to see what's in those joints. And as you're designing, we have to come up with what do we have inside those joints? How much hitting? How much back rust? How much do we need to repair or replace? So tips for you: if you're going about this, double your quantities. That goes for concrete just like it goes for steel. You know, concrete delamination. If you can't see it and you can take it, then double it. Getting a call to go out and look at these pieces is no big deal. It's actually good collaboration between the contractor and the engineer. They'll find out whether they're doing too much pad welding or you know, that kind of thing, or not enough. Sometimes replacement during design, if you think there's, you know, more cost in repair than replacement, go ahead and replace those pieces. Same thing when they get out in the field, if the contractor thinks they'd rather replace parts, you know, weigh that, because that can be cheaper for them to do if it's not a historically insensitive thing. Put that way. We had contingency pay items on this contract. Never done that before, but it basically pads them for overcharges. They don't have to go change orders. So we had a chunk for them to drop them on one truss, a chunk for the other truss, and then another chunk that if there was an emergency, since they keep the bridges open during construction, that they could drop them to repair any of those, anything that happened during construction. So some interesting things that we worked with on the state, and they worked out well. Didn't have any change orders because of that. And then check while you're out there to make sure they match marked it adequately. You know, they should be submitting you a match marking and erection plan, which they did. But you know, just make sure while you're out there. They'll also sometimes bend up members like this, especially these smaller members that they'll pile up. So these have to be recorded, and they need to either heat straighten them or replace them if it's the contractor's fault. So you'll have to have good photo records for that. They did send us an erection plan, or a lifting plan, I should say, but they didn't tell us they were going to be erecting. So we found out through the grapevine and showed up, and sure enough, one of these spans is erected. Looks good. We saw that they sprung it from a temporary bridge underneath it instead of building it on the shore and launching it. We had done some tree clearing for them to launch it, but they found it cheaper, which makes sense based on those crane sizes that they were using. So that was pretty ingenious. One thing they didn't do was plan for the thing to move. These bigger trusses, they will shift as you build them, and you know, the compression will cause the members to shorten. Tension will cause the lower cord to lengthen, and they got to the end and they could not get these things to fit to connect. They were missing bolts, they were slotting holes here. Obviously did some burning, that's a no-no. They had to replace this plate. They did some slotting holes. This is the lower cord where it ties into the new lower gusset. They slotted these holes on that thing, they had to replace those, flatten the lower cord. And I was out there and they're burning right through one of these guys. Sparks flying down. I said, I went over to the inspector. I said, stop that guy. Just tell them to stop what they're doing. And so we had to work with them in the state, and even had a third-party engineer come out and verify that, yeah, they do some repairs to what they had done. So we talked with them. We had a meeting with them, talked about what they'd be seeing as they launched the next bridge, the second bridge. And they were willing to listen. There's a little heavy discussion. I won't go into that, but they were willing to listen anyway, and kind of walk you through the progress on that bridge. We actually were around for that one to get some photos as they did it. They didn't have problems. Second one complete and covered up and painted, and so it looks pretty in place. Got some aerials out in the background. And here's the bridge in the foreground, and the background is Nashville. So pretty close, and we'll help them tie their system together. Few quick photos here. They have a historic feeder dam down here that they'll be able to interpret, put it close enough to that they could see it. And then some jokers standing on the finished product. So a quick overview of the new bridge. I won't go too much into it, but it's a 3-span. Thank you. three span, 6-foot bulk T, hybrid bulk T, which is similar to the Kentucky bulk T. Got drilled shafts and debris walls. So pretty, long spans at 150 foot each, but pretty generally standard bridge that would be easy to maintain. Had some interpretive signage on future boat launch down here, canoe launch kind of thing with the old truss and the old covered bridge in the background. That was some mitigation that we had to do. We also had to do mitigation to protect another truss as part of this 106 process in another area. So really, we had with 3 other environmental mitigation sites, we had 6 counties, 3 NDOT districts, and obviously 2 trusses that in the end turned out pretty nice. So I guess I'll leave our information up here if anyone wants to take that. And with that, do you have any questions?
So if it was baseball, got one truss right, the other one had some trouble, 50, batting 500, that's pretty good. For our bridges, we like a little better average. All right. Yep.
So how did they, the one that had shifted, they have to fabricate new plates and kind of like drill the holes in place, I guess? Is that how they fix that?
That's exactly right. They did hire their own engineer and clear it through us, but yeah, they basically brought out blanks and drilled them. And they actually, the lower chord, one of them was actually kind of wavy, so they had to basically draw it in, tension that up, and draw it in to take that out.
So yeah, the contractor decided to self-perform the work rather than hire someone else to have experience with this. Any questions?
Yeah, no.
Since you disassembled the truss, what was just an average ballpark of how many members you had completely replaced or rehab?
It depends on if you're talking pieces or segments. Each like lower chord segment would be four pieces, but if there's the whole lower chord and whole, all the gussets on the lower. 11,
Most of the lower.
Yeah, it was all the lower chord and lower gussets. About half the steel, frankly. It's probably what with the 4 beams included. Yes, sir.
Was there any thought or any discussion about you took it apart and kind of dealt with it about maybe shipping it to a plant to have it retrofitted and painted and then ship it back out in pieces to be sampled with the contractor, provide that as an option?
Yeah, whether to ship it to the shop to have that done. Yeah, they effectively had an outdoor shop. They had a tented area, and they did have a small outbuilding that they could do, work in, but it was primarily outdoors. It was kind of a mixed-use shop, so to speak. But yeah, that's what they did. Yes, it goes.
Was there the entity that accepted the bridge? Was there a kind of a lessons learned or a conclusion after everything was done that they would entertain doing that again, or did they regret the decision?
With the county that it moved to?
Yes.
They were made aware of it because an engineer stamped off on it, then they aren't accepting liability, so to speak, on it. They are accepting, of course, the future maintenance and that. But as far as the construction, they
cost of what they did versus maybe or something like that.
Right, and the way it works with the select process in Indiana is that the entity that is protecting this facility has to pay for the whole thing. So the county that accepted it didn't have to pay for anything. Now they will have to maintain a feature, which will be a decent cost. But as far as the day one, it saved them a few million, I guess, and finding new long bridges like that.
Good job. Thanks for your attendance, and I think lunch is in the rain ballroom. So.
Thanks.